The next 2 days at Camp Torokina were spent setting up our base and strengthening our position while small parties tried to follow the trails that led further into the island. It wasn't easy. The jungle was thick and the trails dangerous and narrow. Everything about Bougainville was strange to me. As a Navajo, I was used to a dry land, and so were most of the other Marines. Unlike our enemies, our men had never fought in this kind of terrain before. I quickly discovered that the whole island, aside from the first 100 yards nearest the beach, was nothing but swampy jungle. Whenever I dug another foxhole, cutting down through ferns and rotted vegetation and tree roots and mud, the bottom of it would be filled with water by the time I finished. Whatever wasn't jungle was steep and rugged hills. There was even a volcano on that island, and while I was there, it was erupting. I'd read about volcanoes in my geography book, and I was excited at the prospect of being so close to a real one. One of the patrols I was on took us so high up one of those hills that I was above the jungle, and there, only a mile or so away, was the volcano. Boy, that was something. It was all wreathed in smoke from the hot lava inside it. But the volcano was not the only hot thing on that island. Everything was boiling. Bougainville was even steamier than it had been in Guadalcanal. You felt like you were inside a stew pot with the lid on, and although it hardly seemed possible, the insects were fiercer here too. Are the mosquitoes like this where you come from? I asked Georgia Boy one night as we bedded down, trying to arrange our netting to keep out those buzzing bloodsuckers that always seem to find ways to get to our skin. Well, he drawled, there's not so many, but there are some big ones back home. But if we ties down the horses and cows at night, then mosquitoes don't usually carry them off. Speaking of horses, makes me remember the atabrine pills we had to take to keep from getting malaria. They were big enough to choke a horse and always stuck in my throat when they were going down. They tasted bad, and that taste stayed with me for hours after taking them. They were awful. I hated those pills so much that I tried to avoid taking them. I would pretend to swallow while hiding the pill under my tongue. That way I could spit it out later. We had a radio tent set up as the base for our communications. Watch Officer Alex Williams was a supervisor there, and that was where we went to take our pills. Not only was the watch officer in charge of dispensing the pills to us, he'd also been told to keep a very close eye on us Navajos. For some reason, we had developed a reputation, so when he handed me my pill, he would watch closely as I put it into my mouth. "Hold on, Begay," he would say as I turned to run. "Drink this." And he'd hand me a glass of water, stand there in front of me, and watch while I drank the whole thing to make sure the pill actually went down. Soon, however, I figured out a new way to avoid those awful pills. You know the moccasin game, grandchildren, where we have two teams and one hides a stone either in one of their hands or in the moccasin, while the other side tries to guess where it is? It's that same game that the ancient animals of the night played long ago against the ancient creatures of the day. If the night creatures won, then there would be darkness all the time on earth. That was what such creatures of the night as the owl and bat and bear wanted. The day creatures wanted night to last only half the time. Fortunately for us all, Coyote helped the day animals by hiding the stone in his paws so that they won the game. Just like Coyote, I started palming my malaria pill before putting it in my mouth. It was so much fun trying to trick our watch officer that before long all the other Navajos were doing what I did and not taking their atabrine. Every code talker would probably have ended up with malaria if Watch Officer Williams had not found out somehow about what we were doing. One day he discovered the pile of pills behind the radio tent where we'd been tossing them. The next day he changed his routine. "Begay," he barked, "hands at your side and open wide." Then he put the atabrine right in my mouth, sticking it as far down my throat as he could reach. I had to stand there until he saw me swallow. Then I had to open my mouth and stick out my tongue. Officer Williams nodded, a grim smile on his face as he moved on to his next Navajo victim. So our game with Watch Officer Williams and the atabrine ended with him winning the final round. I suppose, despite how terrible those pills tasted, that I should have been very thankful. All the time I was in Bougainville, even though those hungry mosquitoes took half my blood, I never got malaria. One very sad thing for all us code talkers happened on Cape Torokina. Because the Japanese knew the jungle and we did not, we'd all been ordered to keep close watch as soon as it got dark. That was the time when it was most dangerous. The Japanese liked to attack under the cover of night. Sometimes it would be in a forest and a banzai attack. Banzai is a word that the Japanese said when they were saluting their emperor. It was sort of like a god to them. It means 10,000 years. That was how long they thought their new empire of the sun would last. In a banzai attack, every Japanese soldier would leave his post and come running at you with a gun or a sword or even just his bare hands. They were also called suicide attacks because that was what it turned out to be for those Japanese soldiers. Thousands and thousands of them died that way during the war, but they also killed and wounded a lot of our men while they were doing it. A banzai attack might come at any time, even in the middle of the night. They would come screaming banzai at the top of their lungs. They would not stop until you were dead or they were dead. Other times their enemies would just crawl into a foxhole with a knife, cut someone's throat, and crawl out again. You might wake up to find that the man next to you had been killed that way. The Japanese moved so quietly and stealthily that our code name for them was Mouse. Because of the chance of enemy infiltrators, we were under orders to never, under any circumstances, leave our wet, uncomfortable foxholes after dark, even if we had to use the latrine. "That's what your helmets are for," one of the non-coms, Sergeant Wilkie, said, and he wasn't joking. The enemy could be anywhere at night. That was especially the case during those first few days when we had set up our base on Camp Torokina. Anyone sent out of a foxhole would be assumed to be an enemy and could be fired upon. Just after dawn on the morning of our fourth day on Cape Torokina, I was at the command tent when one of our Marine medics rushed in. He was so excited he could barely talk. "I shot an enemy soldier last night," the medic said, "right over there." We went to look, and that was when we found Harry's body. Harry was one of the code talkers in our group on Bougainville, one of the original 29. No one knows why he did it, but he left his foxhole after dark and was mistaken by that medic for the enemy. It's a terrible thing. I don't know if that man who shot him ever forgave himself. His job was to save lives, but he'd end up shooting one of his fellow Marines. Other code talkers died in battle before the end of the war, but Harry was the only one killed by friendly fire. Gradually, we extended our beachhead on Bougainville, pushing forward into that wet island. I remember how hard it was to walk. Mud, so much mud, up to my ankles, up to my knees, even up to my hips. It seemed as if the island were trying to swallow me up. My shoes and socks rotted and fell apart from always being soaked with mud. Although I had yet to see a live enemy soldier, the Japanese were still there and a constant danger. The first time I saw the body of an enemy soldier was November 7th. I was following a trail through the jungle with our squad. The dead man was sitting by the side of the trail, leaning against a coconut tree with his eyes closed as if he was sleeping. I was surprised at how young and peaceful he looked, and how small he was. I realized with a shock that his face was a lot like one of my cousins back home. As I stared at him, there was suddenly a loud bang from right next to me, and one of the buttons on the Japanese soldier's uniform shattered. Sergeant Wilkie had fired an M1 round into the dead man's chest. "Kill every enemy twice," Wilkie said. Better than getting shot by a soldier pretending to be dead." We continued on down the trail. 10 minutes later, we heard another gunshot from behind us. Someone in our second squad was killing that enemy soldier a third time. On November 10th, we had a big birthday celebration. It wasn't for a person, but for the Marine Corps itself. Colonel Liversedge, who had founded the 3rd Raider Battalion, spoke about the long tradition of our Marine Corps. "Men," he said, "it is exactly 138 years since the Marines fought in Tripoli, first raised an American flag over foreign soil." Then he cut the birthday cake with his Marine Corps sword. The cake was 4 feet tall. I was sorry that I didn't get to taste the birthday cake. I was so far back in the crowd that it was all gone by the time I got close enough. Maybe I should have said that it was my birthday, too. After 10 months of training in combat as a Marine, I was now 17 years old, according to the records kept by the Indian agent. But I told no one about it. I didn't tell Georgia Boy or any of my white Signal Corps friends, which now included Smitty, the Marine from Boston I'd met during training, who'd just been attached to our unit. I sure didn't mention it to other code talkers. Back then, celebrating your birthday was still not a common thing for us Navajos. And after all, November 10th was only the day listed as my birthday. Since my mother remembered my birth as being sometime early in the month of the big wind, at Rehoboth School, they'd just chosen the date of November 10th at random and made it my birthday. In honor of the birthday of the Marines, the 2nd and 3rd Raider Battalions, who had been in the heaviest fighting, were moved off the front line and allowed to rest for 2 weeks. However, we code talkers were not given a break. As long as vital secret messages needed to be sent and received, Teams of Navajos had to stay by their radios. More LSTs were coming down the slot between the islands to Bougainville, bringing troops, ammo, and fuel. There were always fears that the Japanese would mount more air raids, so all news of shipping in the slot had to be sent in code. Also, as always, there were urgent messages to be sent in our code when we're out in the field with the enemy close by. On the very next day, November 11th, one of these messages had to be sent. The 9th Regiment was on the Numa Numa Trail, half a mile inland, setting up a new command post. Bill Toledo and I were with them. As we moved down the trail, we saw signs that the Japanese had just retreated. By the side of the trail were weapons, clothing, packs, and other personal items that appeared to have been abandoned in haste. Just about every Marine could be seen picking up equipment and personal items left behind by the enemy as they pulled back. One of the favorite things that we salvaged were the supply packages that were the Japanese equivalent of our cans of sea rations. Sea rations, grandchildren, were the special food packets that we Marines were given to carry with us, so that we would have food to eat while we were cut off. Each sea ration package was supposed to be a 3-meal-a-day food source. Dry biscuits, canned meat, sugar, and powdered coffee, all in a big can. Sometimes, too, we'd get a D ration. That was sort of a hard candy bar made out of sugar, chocolate, and oat flour. Every Marine complained about our sea rations. Even though the government kept trying to improve them, nobody loved sea rations. In the last year or so of the war, they started giving us something new called K rations that had a lot more in them. Sometimes even fruit drinks, toilet paper, peanuts, and chewing gum. C rations and K rations had to be waterproof and able to stand the heat or the cold. So they were backed in tough, wax-coated cardboard. You had to use a knife to cut them open. Those Japanese food packets were much more interesting than our C rations. They contained small boxes of Japanese candy, packets of biscuits, cans of stew, as well as lots of pamphlets written in Japanese. A few of us kept those pamphlets as souvenirs, but most just threw them away. However, picking up Japanese things was not wise. Our enemies had learned that American soldiers loved to take souvenirs. So the Japanese began to plant booby traps. When one of us tried to pick up a pack or a knife, a supply packet, or even a pen, he might set off an explosion. I had just finished stowing a Japanese food packet in my bag when I heard the sharp sound of an explosion from farther up on the trail. 2 Marines had just been wounded in their arms and legs by shrapnel when they tried to retrieve a seemingly discarded .35 caliber Japanese machine pistol. After sorting out what happened, our lieutenant turned to us code talkers. "Set up and get ready to send," he ordered as he began to write his message on a pad. We fastened our radio to a big palm tree, and I cranked it up while Bill put on the headphones and picked up the microphone. Then I read off our lieutenant's message to him as I translated it into our code and written it on our own pad. In English, "To all units, Japanese are booby-trapping personnel equipment, installations, and bivouacs. Over." Man-trap was our word for a booby-trap. Mouse, as I told you already, was the Japanese. If our message had not been sent and received all down the line, I'm sure that many of our men would have been wounded or even killed. In fact, as soon as we finished sending and were heading down the trail, I carefully took out the Japanese food pack I'd picked up and tossed it into the jungle. There were 4 rules for sending message in the field: send, receive, roger, and move. The Japanese had equipment that could pinpoint where an American radio transmission was coming from. Although they could not decipher our messages, they knew they were important.